Hi, I'm Shelley Wood, the managing editor for Heartwire, and my guests here today are Dr. Doug Zipes from Indiana University and Dr. Kowey from Jefferson Medical College. And I'm calling this the first annual, perhaps the first only, but I hope not, the first annual Heart.org book club, because our topic today is fiction. The gentlemen I have with me today are both novelists. You may not have known this about them. I myself have had the pleasure of reading both of their novels, and that's going to be our topic for today. So let's start with you, Dr. Zipes. I would love to know when you first got the idea for writing your first novel.
Actually, probably 30 or more years ago, reading a bestseller by a physician, and I thought, I can do better than that.
You're not going to tell us who the physician is, I guess. Right.
He's actually very well known, and I should be half as successful. I actually started back then and worked for easily 20 plus years with a lot of false starts.
Okay.
And a lot of self-education.
So actually writing it, not just turning it over in your head, but sort of playing with
actually
the
writing it.
Okay.
My first novel is in a drawer. My wife is the co-author. And we found we could not write a novel together.
Right.
So that idea, which is still a good idea, is in a drawer. And I decided I would do this one alone. And I took some creative writing courses, both at Indiana University and Iowa has a wonderful writers festival. And I took that 2 summers in a row and found out that writing fiction is a lot different than writing the science that I've been doing for 40 years.
What about you, Dr. Kowey? Do you want to walk us through when you first got the idea for this?
Well, I think all of us have had this creative itch that we wanted to scratch.
Well, we're going to come back to that. I'm not sure if everyone has it, but okay.
Well, those of us who have written clearly have, and I remember distinctly having that when I was younger. But this book started because I was sitting in a courtroom defending a doctor in a malpractice case, and I became very angered by the whole idea of how doctors were being manhandled in malpractice cases, and I wanted to write something to explain to the public all of the terrible things that happen in the medical malpractice system. And I thought if I just wrote another whiny nonfiction book that it wouldn't be nearly as much fun as writing a story. So that's where this came from.
So to me, a journalist, not a physician, reading this, we write about tort reform. It's an issue that comes up in the sort of journalistic stories we do. But I was astounded by the case, I guess. Is this a particularly egregious example of what goes on, or is this sort of true to life?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is all too typical of what happens to physicians who get into this meat grinder of the malpractice system. And I'm sure Doug would share with me this observation that many doctors are really changed by the experience and no longer practice medicine the same way they did before they went through this.
So in your case, then, was this a bit of an outlet for some of the anger you had?
Yeah, my wife called it my psychotherapy. Rather than complaining to her at the dinner table, she said, why don't you go do something constructive like write about it? And that's where this was really very therapeutic, actually, for me, and I really very much enjoyed that experience.
All right. Well, so you have a tort reform, a lot of legal issues is a major theme in your novel. Yours is really international terrorism and lots of those themes. How did those appeal to you, or why did you want to write about them?
Well, first, I thought, without giving away the
there'll be no spoilers,
book, right?
We should say that.
I thought the idea was so engaging and so potentially true that I wanted to put it down on paper and create a thriller.
Okay.
And had such fun doing it. And during the process, I had to set rules for myself. For example, I could not write in an airport waiting for my next flight.
Right.
Because I'd missed the next flight. I got so involved in the book. I had to set barriers for myself. I had to force myself to write my next science article when I wanted to write.
Right, this was the reward for doing your homework.
Well,
I did wonder, how do you divide your medical scientific lives from this creative side? You've said it was a bit of an outlet, but did you have to create special time in your day? Did you reward yourself, as you've just suggested? How did you fit it in? You guys are very busy guys. I know that from these meetings and elsewhere.
Well, I did it basically when I had time. It will differ significantly depending upon the time in your career.
Right.
I'm in the fall of my career, having published many scientific articles over many years, books and so on. And now I can afford to let the next science article lapse and spend time with the fiction.
Start your next career, yes.
And the fun of this is it's so free. When I write science, it's introduction, methods, results, and discussion.
Much more
How many times can you say that?
Right.
With this, anything you put down that moves the story forward in an interesting fashion is legal. And it's so fun.
So, Dr. Kowey, time in your day to do this, did it have to be structured?
Yeah, it really does have, for me, it really had to be very structured. And my creative writing time is very early in the morning. I'm a very early riser.
Right.
No one else gets up with me at the same time, not even the dogs. So I have compartmentalized that time, and my brain is very attuned to the early morning. I really can't write later in the day. I can't write at night. I lost my creative edge. And for me, it was being very disciplined and rigorous about putting aside the time to do it. Because as I agree with Doug that other things impinge on your writing time, and you become resentful of the extra time that gets taken away from you. The only way to really preserve that is to say, this is the block of time that I really will dedicate.
And did something else have to give? Did you have to give up something else that you enjoyed doing or perhaps didn't enjoy doing in order to make the time for this?
Well, I think I certainly have sacrificed writing more medical articles and more textbook chapters and things, but that's not really a sacrifice because as I agree with Doug, I've done enough of that.
Yeah.
I could do a few more, but I don't really have to do a whole lot more. That's what I sacrificed. I didn't sacrifice my family time or my leisure time or the other things that I do because I think that makes you stale. And I also think that it leads to block. I think at some point if you really push that very hard and you don't recreate yourself, then you don't really become a successful writer or continue as a successful writer.
Sure. What did your family and friends think of you guys when you were writing? Were you, good to be around, or were you cranky? I mean, did it affect your lives with your sort of closest, nearest and
My
dearest?
family lived part of the book with me.
Well, I'm wondering if they went on vacation with you.
Anytime.
No. I mean, there's a part of your book, I don't think we're giving much away, at least part of it is set in Petra. I myself have been to Petra, so I loved revisiting it in your book. But I thought that probably was a bit of a research trip for the book for you, right?
Well, actually, I did Petra. I had the idea for the book, but not for the ending of the book.
All right.
And I did Petra before I knew I would use that in the book.
Okay.
And
so you got to go back.
What I described for my hero, I went through with the same feelings that he goes through in Petra.
Oh.
And I'll send you some pictures after this.
Well, we can't give too much away.
It can be scary.
Okay, I think we're talking about a bit of a vertigo issue here, but we'll leave it at that. And for you, I mean, were you, so you vacationed with your family, but sometimes you have the stereotype of the writer who really becomes the recluse. They need to lock themselves in their studies. Was that your experience?
No, not at this point. Perhaps if I started at age 25 and I wanted to be a serious writer of fiction, I might have done that. But now it's just fun. I don't know, is it the Marines that say they own the night? Whatever. I own my day.
Wow,
I wake up without an alarm clock.
I want to become an electrophysiologist novelist.
What I'm going to do during that day, knowing that I'm the editor of a heart journal and I have textbooks that have to be revised and so on. But within that, I own the day.
And Dr. Kowey, you weren't transformed into
No, actually,
novelist?
I actually enjoyed discussing the book as it evolved with my wife.
Okay.
She happens to be an attorney, by the way, and some of the, as you know, there's a good deal of.
I thought you must have had a legal type to look over it.
Yeah. So, and there were actually a number of attorneys who read it and helped me with it. But I really enjoyed as the story evolved, especially as I was doing the outline, discussing it with her, and it was just fun. It was a fun exercise, and I just want to emphasize something that Doug said. For us, this is fun. This is not a job. This is a hobby. This is an avocation. This is something we've always wanted to do. And I think that we're just tremendously fortunate to have been able to complete it. I mean, I know a lot of people who have those drawers, where they have their novels. And,
I've talked to countless physicians.
They come to you and tell you that.
Say, I want to write a novel.
Right.
Well, when you finally sit down and put pen to paper,
not so easy.
It's not so easy.
Right.
But I think many of us have this creative juice that has to
Needs an
find
outlet.
an outlet. And we've done it with the novels, and it's just so fun to be able to do that. Prior to that, my creativity was in the science that I did.
Right.
And I've just put it in a different venue.
And I think doctors are in an amazingly good situation to do this because we relate to people. We're constantly in contact with other people.
You meet so many different people.
Absolutely.
You travel.
So many interesting experiences. So there's a wealth of stuff in there.
Yeah.
The issue is finding the time, being disciplined enough, and being creative enough to try to get it down in a book. And as I said, I think Doug and I count ourselves very fortunate to be able to complete this.
And historically, Anton Chekov, Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, we have a legacy of physicians who have written
great fiction writers.
some beautiful work. And more recently, Michael Crichton, Abraham Varghese. There have been a number of physician writers who have done very well.
And it's true, you do have access to the sort of whole spectrum of humanity to dig in for
Sure.
characters. So this is a question because I couldn't help but feel that I recognized a few famous cardiologists in the pages of these novels. Are people, I mean, I'm not going to name anyone, but are some of the people that your colleagues might recognize, are there versions of them in these novels?
Well, for me, absolutely yes. And I had a lot of trepidation about that. I wrote about them because I knew them and I could describe them very well. And as a novice, it's really nice to be able to relate back. And I was concerned about how they would take it. And the revelation is that they love it.
Oh, they do.
And I've had people ask me now that they've read the book, "Can I be in your next book?"
Yeah.
Because people really like to see their characters portrayed in a story, and it's actually one of the very positive things that's happened with the book.
All right. And Dr. Zipes?
Mine are totally fiction. Any fictitious character has to have
Its
a basis
origin,
of somebody
sure.
you know and how they acted. And I try to get a person in my mind's eye and stay with that individual. And it's patterned to some degree by the people you've
Sure.
met.
Well, I'm now secretly hoping that there's going to be a website journalist appearing in one of your stories next, but I'm not getting my hopes up. What about yourselves, though? I was thinking that in the context of the two main characters. Now, you have a police detective as your main character. You have a physician as your main character. And I think knowing that you two had written these books, I inevitably started looking at the main character for signs of who I thought you were. Totally unfair, completely unreasonable. But they're quite complex male characters. Did you see any of yourselves in them, or you did? All right.
Absolutely. My main character's relationship with his father, for example, is a replication of
a bit of
mine
autobiography
with
in there.
my own father. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think we all. I agree with what Doug said a few minutes ago about how we structure things in our books, but all of this has to be somewhat autobiographical. There has to be some part of us in these characters for these characters to live and breathe. What's really amazing to me is that I know who these people are. If I saw them walking down the street, I'd recognize them.
Right.
They have become part and parcel of my life and existence. So I would have been surprised if they were totally unrecognizable to me. And in fact, the primary character here is somewhat autobiographical.
But you sort of launch them as a piece of yourself, but then you must need to build in parts of other people and maybe some of the other physicians I thought I recognized.
And you do. And my creativity, it isn't always in the morning. It's unpredictable. Sometimes I'm absolutely stone uncreative.
Right.
And don't touch the book
Set
at
it
that point.
aside.
And at other times I'm wailing. And at that time, and I'm working with Zach, the main character, he's talking to me. He's telling me what I've got to put down.
What he wants to do next.
And I can't type fast enough to keep up with the conversation. When that happens, it is so exhilarating. I just love those periods.
Sounds wonderful.
It was also a lot of fun for me. As you know, this is a Philly book.
Right.
So
I feel like I know Philadelphia. I mean, I've never been before, but I really did.
It was
get a
fun
sense
creating the scenes, and I actually went back and revisited most of those scenes so that some of them came from childhood memory, and I needed to go back and refresh my memory about them. But I think that when you revisit those scenes, memories of yourself in those scenes really become very poignant. And it's really very hard to describe how that feels, but it is exhilarating. It is really, it's a rush. It's a creative rush for sure.
Well, this is my last question, and I really would like to know from each of you, and we can start with Dr. Kowey, what was the hardest thing to write about? Either the hardest theme or the hardest section. Let's talk about the biggest barrier in the book.
The two hardest parts of my book were the beginning and the end, but that's not novel. I mean, that's true for most books.
Right.
So the first chapter of the book is a cardiac arrest, as you know, and writing that and roping the reader was really very important to me. And then the ending. And the ending really needed to be consistent with what had gone before. And the other reason the ending was important to me is because there's a sequel. And I wanted to make sure that as I got into the end of this, that people would want the sequel, that they would want to know what happened to these characters in another place at another time. So the hardest parts for me were bridging from the beginning of the book to that very important
Right.
ending.
You need to create enough closure that it's a standalone, but enough of a desire for more, I suppose.
A little bit of a tease.
Okay,
yeah.
beginning and the end. And for you?
Actually, the beginning and the end were the easiest because I knew in my mind exactly how I wanted to start it and exactly how I wanted to end it. I write like driving at night. Your headlights illuminate the next 100 yards and then the next 100 yards. I know where I'm going to end up, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. And that's the fun of it. The hardest scenes were the sex scenes.
I wanted to ask about that. I was hoping someone would bring it up.
The first time, or one of the almost final draft, I showed to a medical editor. And he said, you know, you're tantalizing us with a little bit of sex here, a little bit of, you've got to be more explicit if you really want to sell this.
Okay.
So I became a little bit more explicit.
You went
and that
for
was
it.
hard, not to be gross, but to write about the sex.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, most authors say that.
Yeah.
And
It is
that was hard.
Yeah, it's hard work.
All right, then. Well, you heard it here first. There are sex scenes in both of these novels, but they are also far richer than that might suggest. It's been a pleasure talking with both of you about these today. A pleasure reading the books. Thank you very much.